It's always very hard to start talking about the plight of Copts. I'm a Copt myself, and I've been active in Egyptian politics under Mubarak's regime for the past decade, and it certainly has not been easy. While it's been propagated here in America that Mubarak's regime was an ally of the West and that was tolerant to Christians, nothing could have been further from the truth. I experienced all forms of persecution under Mubarak's regime firsthand for just being who I am and for speaking out for basic freedoms, basic economic liberty, fiscal responsibility, freedom of religion, and individualism, and basically everything that America and the U.S. Constitution stands for. Freedom is something that all peoples want, although Mubarak's regime would like to tell you differently. What happened to us was, while the Muslim Brotherhood was being propagated as banned, we were the ones that were actually banned from Egyptian politics and Egyptian political discourse. While the Muslim Brotherhood were in the parliament in 2005, we were banned by 2 court orders because we are pro-normalization with Israel and pro-absolute religious freedom, secularism, and the abolishment of Sharia law. Sharia law has been introduced in the Egyptian constitution by Sadat in 1971. Ever since Sharia law has been introduced in the Constitution, the definition of citizenship changed. Sharia law does not recognize the concept of citizenship. All people, all inhabitants of the lands governed by Islamism are slaves to serve the state and its rulers. Egypt has a massive bureaucracy of over 7 million employees working in the executive branch of government, and it's a police state, a totalitarian state, and the citizens are there to make sure that this stays intact. And although this is a plight of all Egyptians, minorities, Christian minorities like Copts, which are Egyptian Christians, the word Copt means in the Coptic language, Egyptian. It's originated from the word Kemet, which is Kibet, and which is basically means Egypt in the only spoken known Egyptian language, which is Coptic, which is also, by the way, banned under Mubarak's regime, and it has been banned for over 1,000 years by the Islamist ruler Mu'izz al-Din al-Fatimi that seized power. So this is basically what Copts mean. Well, Copts are under Sharia law. They're not citizens. They are hostages. Because when the government sees you as an enemy and you have to pay a tribute, which is called a jizya, to stay alive, and although it has been abolished in 1850s by Said Pasha, it is still very well functioning because we pay, as Egyptian taxpayers, funding for Azhar University in Cairo, which is an Islamist university that propagates the morals and the so-called grievances of terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda. I dare anyone at all to give me one differentiation between what Al-Azhar University, the moderate Azhar University in Egypt propagates, and between the rhetoric of Al-Qaeda. There's not a single difference. There's not a single difference between the rhetoric that Mubarak's regime and currently the Supreme Council of Armed Forces says and the difference between the rhetoric of Al-Qaeda. Although they are two different regimes, when we look at their history, they are hailing from the same organization. To be able to understand who governs Egypt today, we have to look back at 1952, when a group called the Free Officers from the Egyptian military perpetrated a coup d'etat against Egypt's secular constitutional monarchy. The Free Officers were a group of men that were members of the secret apparatus of the Muslim Brotherhood. They were the military wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. The founding fathers of the current Egyptian regime are the military wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. And that is a historic fact mentioned by a member of the Free Officers and also a former member of the parliament in Egypt. He's called Khalid Muhyiddin. And he says in his biography that the first president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, and himself swore allegiance to the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, on the gun and Quran in the 40s. What happened in the 1940s is that the Muslim Brotherhood infiltrated the Egyptian army. And they became the secret apparatus that later perpetrated the 1952 coup d'etat. The Islamization of Egypt started in 1952, and it did not start after the Arab Spring. What we are seeing today is the ugly face of what has been started back then, 60 years ago. These are only the consequences. And right now, Copts are only, they're not citizens. They're, of course, as I mentioned before, hostages. They are dhimmis. And the origin of the word dhimmi in Arabic is zimmi. And according to the most credible Arabic dictionary, which is Mu'jam al-Wasit, the word zimmi is coming from mazmum, which is the disgraceful. So when you're called a dhimmi, you are called the disgraceful. And sometimes they even translate it as the stinky one, the person who stinks. So this is how we are defined under Sharia law, the disgraceful. And the Egyptian military didn't make a secret of it. Of course, when their founding fathers are coming from the secret apparatus of the Muslim Brotherhood, it was normal that they escalate their radicalism. Under Mubarak's regime, Mubarak waged a proxy war against Copts. The last two major terrorist attacks against Copts that happened in January 2010 in Naga Hamedi, where a gunman randomly shot at Copts leaving a church, killing 7 people, and 6 of them were Christians and 1 man was Muslim. The gunman was called Al-Kamuni. But who was Al-Kamuni? Al-Kamuni worked for the representative of the National Democratic Party of the region of Naga Hamedi. And there are videos all over YouTube with the gunman, the terrorist, with the representative of the National Democratic Party from Mubarak's regime, where the member of parliament calls the mass murderer his man. We have these videos on YouTube. They never even tried to make it a secret that they were involved in terrorist attacks against Copts. Yet when I come here, people tell me that Mubarak is an ally of the West and is an ally against the war on terror. And of course, this is highly offensive and insulting to me and to a lot of people that got killed. Not only that, also the terrorist attack against Christians, bomb that killed over 30 people in 2010, in December, New Year's Eve of December 2010. We have the names of the people that plotted these terrorist attacks upon orders of Habib al-Adri, which is the Ministry of Interior under Mubarak. Mubarak's regime plotted most of the major terrorist attacks against Copts for the past 30 years, and we have the documents with the names, with videos, with pictures. yet he is the ally of the West. The hatred against Copt is also 14 centuries old. It's not something new. Umar ibn al-Khattab, which he died in 644 AD, had something called the Omarian Treaty, which was a legislation of 24 fascist laws that should be applied on the Christians of the countries they invade. Some of these laws were so fascist that they went as far as Copts or Christians, Syrian Christians, and basically all the non-Muslims of the region should even shave their heads differently, should wear different clothes, so that Muslims would be able to harass them in the street, as it literally says. They're not allowed to build churches, and if their churches are destroyed, they're not allowed to fix them, and so much more. 24 of these fascist laws. I will not go through all of them. But this also goes back to Sadat. When we look at, and also Mubarak, when we look at the terrorist Omar Abdurrahman, which is currently serving life sentence in a federal correction prison here in America for 1993 bombings. Omar Abdurrahman also got his PhD from the moderate Azhar University, and I read his PhD thesis, and it was titled The Position of Quran from Its Adversaries. The first chapter is called, because I found this very interesting, The Position of Quran from Its Adversaries, Death or Islam. That's the option. You either get killed or you die. Even the jizya ransom tax was abolished, and he got his PhD with honors from the state-controlled university. This is the current situation. Now, what happens to a dhimmi like me? Of course, I was never a dhimmi, but that's how the state views me. What happens when a dhimmi decides to dissent against the status quo? What happens when you say this is unacceptable? I want to live like a normal human being and have civil rights like the rest of civilized world. I would be defined under Sharia law as kafir harbi, which is a militant infidel. Even if all I do is write articles, have conferences like these where I say that all people should live in equality, justice, liberty, and dignity, that would define me as a kafir harbi. Any form of dissent against Sharia law can define you as a kafir harbi. And what happens to these people? Immediately get killed, or according to Sharia law, they should get the limbs cut from opposite sides or get crucified. What's also very interesting is this also applies to American troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. In 2009, I was browsing the wonderful forum of Al Jazeera TV channel, and there was a question posted by a man who said, I was wondering if it is allowed to consume the flesh of American soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq. Can we cannibalize them? For some reason, he's a cannibal, and he wants to ask about the theological legitimacy of this action. And what was the answer? The answer was a long debate of almost 5 pages. People discussing the theological aspects. There are 4 schools of Islamic jurisprudence. You've got the Shafi'i, the Hanbali, the Hanafi, and the Maliki. And one of the most moderate schools of Islamic jurisprudence is the Shafi'i. So they settled the issue as follows. The Shafi'i allows that a Muslim should kill and consume the flesh of the militant infidel or the apostate of Islam. So there are legal theological grounds that allow cannibalism. Cannibalism in Islamic history is not something that is very frowned upon, although the rest of the three schools of Islamic jurisprudence refused it. It has happened before by the sword of Allah, one of the Prophet of Islam's friends, which was called Khalid ibn al-Walid. Khalid ibn al-Walid that invaded Iraq. He also practiced cannibalism, and where he cooked the head of Malik bin Nuwayra because he refused to pay him money, and ate it in front of Malik bin Nuwayra's wife, whom he raped on the same night. But of course, this is not frowned upon. And this is what you subject yourself to when you speak the truth. So when people ask me why there aren't enough of you in the Middle East, why there aren't enough of you in Egypt, we don't like to get decapitated and be subjected to cannibalism. I don't know about you, but it's not how I like to die. Okay, so this is how the situation is. But there is a solution, saying that there is a solution. I was a protester in Tahrir Square, and I have seen that this is against human nature, this is against the evolution of our planet and the natural course of humanity, and that's why they're funding it through Saudi Arabia and Qatar and blood conflict oil to perpetuate it. The solution is America should stop funding the killing machine in Egypt. When we decided, thank you. When we decided to become no longer Dhimmis, and we were defined as Kafir Harbis, and we went in front of state television and radio building, which is called Maspero, and I've went there several times with my friends because we went there to protest against the systemic oppression and demonization of Christians and non-Muslims and Jews and everyone else. I was going to the protest last October 9th with my friends, but I got a fever and I didn't go. But some of my friends went, and one of them was Michael Mossad. Michael Mossad went with his fiancée, and a lot of them were coming over to dinner at my place afterwards, after they finished the protest, because we thought this was going to happen, just like any other protest. But what happened was Michael Mossad was killed by a military vehicle, an armored vehicle that got on the pavement and severed his legs in front of his fiancée, who threw her body on top of him and tried to protect him. And while she was screaming and begging for help, they kicked her in her stomach and called her an infidel, excuse my language, whore. And while this was happening, I was standing in front of television. I was sitting and watching television where a military man said, "The Christian sons of dogs are trying to kill us." So we are the Christian sons of dogs that, this is how the state defines us. Michael Mossad died, and none of his killers were prosecuted, because you do not take the blood of a Muslim for the blood of a non-Muslim. That's a theological Sharia law. لا يؤخذ دم مؤمن بدم كافر. That's the law. You do not prosecute a Muslim for doing anything to a Christian. President James Madison said, "It is a settled policy of America that as peace is better than war, war is better than tribute. The United States, while they wish for war with no nation, will buy peace with none." Where are we now from President James Madison? We cannot afford to be weak. We cannot afford to be in pathological denial of the threat. It's just suicide, unless someone wants to commit suicide. That's a different thing. But weakness is a luxury none of us can afford. Thank you.